Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? These lines of fire by William Blake, arguably his most famous, invite us to partake of creation and the paradoxes of the divine, with an equal measure of wonder and terror. Wonder and terror are evoked through the element of fire, an intangible and odd element, but protean, one deeply connected to life on this planet and deeply human, more than just a chemical reaction or an ecological stimulus, far more than just combustion and volatility. The history of fire and the history of life are twin flames. So here begins my infernal quest into the forests of the night and the distant deeps or skies, an eccentric story of fire. Welcome to the Subverse. I'm your host, Susan Mathews. With this podcast, we will voyage from the cosmic to the quantum, from cells to cities, from colonial histories to reimagining futures. In this third season of our podcast, get out your torches and your fire sticks as we follow the element of fire, in some of its guises at least. Go through the episodes we have covered so far in this season and the burning questions they raise. There is no doubt that fire casts quite a wide spell, and it spreads far and wide. Fire is flame. It is heat, light, warmth, glow, plume, ash, and ember. This does not even parallel its metaphoric power, its power to mesmerize, and its power to terrorize. Stay with me in this episode while I take you through some of my chosen twists and turns, odds and ends, and things I learned and want to share with you, exploring fire for our podcast season. I started this episode with Blake's fiery poetry. As Lynn, Margulis, and Dorion Sagan write in their wonderful book, What is Life?, the tiger referenced in this poem is poised atop a pyramid of global nutrition, whose base is the sun. The tiger, burning bright in Blake's memorable phrase, represents the funneling of solar radiation into a highly specific and potentially terrifying form. So what is life? For Margulis and Sagan, one answer among many is that life is the transmutation of sunlight. It is the energy and matter of the sun become the green fire of photosynthesizing beings. It is the natural seductiveness of flowers. It is the warmth of the tiger stalking the jungle in the dead of night. This green fire converts widely to the red and orange and yellow and purple sexual fire of flowering plants. The idea of the green fire for me is just so striking and powerful to remember that heat-giving source, the sun, that solar energy, that surplus, that excess that is then gifted to us by plant sex, aiding our own evolution into and life as animals and humans. I would like to take a step back here in time, a giant step back, if I may, to 420 million years ago, where we glean the first fires. As Stephen Pyne, a prolific historian of fire, a self-confessed pyromantic, and my first guest on the season of the podcast, asks in his book, The Pyrocene, what was the character of burning across deep time? It started with a spark. The oldest component, lightning. Only lightning, a geophysical phenomenon, a high-powered electromagnetic pulse that induces energy into everything in the area, can account for the prevalence of combustion on a planetary scale. Tan Twang Eng, in The Gift of Rain, writes, "Veins of lightning flared and throbbed behind the wall of clouds, turning the bruised sky pink, and I felt I was being granted glimpses of blood pulsing silently through the ventricles of an immense human heart." Seamus Heaney, in The Burial at Thebes, compares lightning to a necklace, a fire of stars. But for fire to really become a planetary force, it needed life, which lightning is not. It needed more than ignition. It needed oxygen and fuel that stir together to make combustion, and in the right context, fire. So how did this happen? Life in the oceans first stuffed the atmosphere with oxygen, and life on land lathered the surface with fuels in the form of vascular plants and woody lignin, combustible hydrocarbons. As soon as plants rooted on land, lightning set them ablaze. The history of fire is the history of terrestrial life. This is what Stephen Pyne refers to as first fire. Fire as a bridge between the non-living and the living. Pyne, in narrating the natural history of fire, takes us through various epochs and extinctions, along various arcs and trajectories, a planet veering between fire and ice, till the arrival of hominins and second fire. This second fire was when fire was aided and abetted by humans. From ancient bushfires, our first pyrotechnology of cooking, to fire as fallow in agriculture, the evolution of our species went hand in hand with fire's evolution. From open fires to the hearth, and fire symbolism in ritual fire. And over time, we came to third fire, where Pyne writes, "Now we burn lithic landscapes, no longer bounded by fuel, season, sun, or the rhythms of wetting and drying, and where fire has been atomized and reduced into its constituent parts. Through charcoal as medium and kilns where temperatures could reach volcanic intensities, the fiery arts were born. Fire could transmute metal and create all manner of shape, color, and form. With the extraction of fossil biomass and the transmutation into many forms and shapes, fire made us geological agents, destabilizing deep time. This fire was also a fire of empire and slavery, histories entwined through the extraction of coal, the powering of slave ships, a blackened register of geological record. And now, third fire, Pyne writes, becomes third nature, where we act without ecological limits, and we drive a planet to the brink and beyond, a story of fire as loss and destruction. Interestingly enough, Pyne says we actually have a fire deficit. As a fire planet, we are built to burn. But by removing good fire, the fires that were an ecological stimulus and led to ecological renewal, in the hands of indigenous and aboriginal peoples or farmers as stewards, this third fire has now become a planet killer, a harbinger of climate doom. From a celestial and originary green fire, we now see terrifying red plumes and a rising blue fire of the oceans. So too much bad fire not enough good, and a world out of pyric balance. I do not want to recite the litany of our environmental and social grievances which arise from third fire. That is so ingrained in our planetary record, in our human registers. So, what I do want to do is take you through some exciting ideas and writing that I believe help us think through fire differently, starting with myth. What if we could rewrite these origin stories? What if we reclaim green fire and rethink potentialities and possibilities? And how can we work with fire as an agent and metaphor of change? Of all the major symbols in literature, art, and religion, perhaps no symbol is more ambiguous and double-edged than fire. Fire's cosmologies are also so varied and diverse, but most of the stories start with a theft, a stealing from the gods by a trickster. As an aside, I also found it so interesting that many of the world's cosmologies include rabbits and possums. Now, one myth which has stuck with us is the story of Prometheus. In Hesiod's legendary account of how humans came to be, Prometheus, his name meaning forethought, plays a decisive role. But two characters who are often forgotten in this tale are his brother Epitheus, afterthought quite literally, and the wife of his brother, Pandora. For me, it is Pandora's story that I want to excavate. But first, let us recap the tale. Prometheus the Titan steals divine fire and gives it to humans. Zeus asks Hephaestus to create Pandora as punishment. She marries Epitheus, the brother of Prometheus. The jar or box is the wedding gift. Ills and torments are unleashed. Prometheus is punished and chained to a mountain, an eagle pecking away at his liver. Now, why is Pandora so important in the story of fire, apart from the box or jar? The first is that it irks me that she is often ignored, downplayed, or forgotten, as women often are in tales. And she is not just any woman, she is the first woman. So we need a more critical lens to inspect this myth. And I think this is important for many reasons. The Promethean myth is, as I alluded to, a highly gendered myth, a muscular myth of conquest and ascent. No limits or planetary boundaries come in its way. No technological barriers. So I went looking for a counter tale, and voila, I found it. A fascinating article written by Elisha Marder, an associate professor of French and comparative literature, in 2014. The article is entitled Pandora's Fireworks, or Questions Concerning Femininity, Technology, and the Limits of the Human. Marder writes that while Prometheus's interventions in man's destiny established a continuity between the realm of the gods and that of man, and his gift of fire makes man more manly and the human more human, Pandora introduces a set of more disquieting differences and disruptive discontinuities into the category of human. Hesiod describes her as a kind of counter-fire, anti-puros. Pandora is not on the other side of life, but rather offers an animated alternative to life. She is designed as a technological counterpart to divine fire. She is fabricated by Hephaestus out of water and clay. She is made with fire, burns like fire, and consumes the fire of men. Designed to take fire away from men, the first woman is a simulacrum, an imitation of life. She not only brings death, sexual difference, and childbearing into human life, she also introduces artifice, imitation, deception, ornamentation, sexuality, beauty, femininity, technology, temporality, anticipation in the form of both hope and fear, and rhetoric into the very foundation of what it means to be human. And what is she made for? Marder tells us it is perhaps best to imagine the spectacle she makes as a pyrotechnic display, what we call fireworks in English, but that in French goes by the name feu d'artifice, artificial and/or imitation fire. Pandora's fireworks illuminate the awesome strangeness that makes human life something radically other than human. She is a surprise. She is wonder and terror. Pandora establishes the defining limits of the human. I enjoyed this retelling or alternative telling of the story. By bringing Pandora back, we have a counter-fire to a third fire run amok. And that is by acknowledging our vulnerabilities as a species, our confusion. It also returns us to awe and earthly spectacle. We cannot look away from Pandora. She forces our gaze on her dazzling pyrotechnics before we burn down our world, reminding us of our humanness and our extra humanness, our connections with the rest of the biosphere. This is where I would like to now speak about sex and fire, or the pyrosexual, to borrow this word from the scholarly work I'm going to introduce. In metaphor, sex and fire are intimately connected. The erotic is mediated through fire and heat tropes, and the language of desire is ignited and populated by fire. Yet I want to focus on amazing work done by Nigel Clarke and Catherine Youssef in their article titled Queer Fire: Ecology, Combustion and Pyrosexual Desire, published in 2018. Clarke and Youssef peel back the metaphors of fire and sex and suggest instead a genealogy that traces the deep conjoined history of sexual desire and fiery consummation. By coupling sex and fire, by contextualizing the pyrosexual within the wider economy of Earth and cosmos, they seek ways to escape industrial capitalism's current hyper-consumptive cycles of accumulation and ways around ecological thought's consternation over unmanaged desire. I will focus on a few things that I loved in the article. The first is they remind us that plants are sexual beings. It took a great deal of plant sex and some evolutionary twists and turns to populate the terrestrial world with fully combustive vegetation. This in turn made the living world more hospitable to flame, leading to selection for species or communities that tolerated and even depended upon flame, including our own. Clarke and Youssef make other very interesting observations. One is that the suppression of the urge to burn has often been accompanied by regulation of other bodily desires. And in more orthodox environmentalisms, there is a pervading assumption that the best way to deal with limitation is through greater economy, parsimony, and self-moderation, with a curbing of desire and renouncing of pleasure. Fire, they write, is also this boundary between biologic life and inhuman materialities. So for the authors, it offers a track that restructures the asexual-sexual binary with lateral forms of agency and modes of desire. This goes beyond the logics of reproductive futurism, prevailing heteronormativism, which are rife in intergenerational motifs in much of environmental thinking and activism, or worse, couched racist narratives in talk of population limits. In a brilliant section, they note that just like an offloading of economic goods that manages to escape the circuit of reinvestment, sex for its own sake, sex for the pleasure of it, is pure discharge, non-productive expenditure, a waste of energy, and what can be more threatening to hypercapitalism? Though that being said, they acknowledge that capitalism has also found ways to cycle this into what the authors term as the powder keg of ceaseless accumulation. So even sex becomes fuel for the capitalist machine. This tryst of fire and life, this solar excess, this abundance, challenges notions of human-made austerity. Life's natural exuberance, the need to burn, exceeds the dictates of survival. As Pyne puts it in the Pyrocene, we need a lot less Promethean fire and a lot more primeval. For Clark and Yusuf, the primordial forces remain vibrant, open, and unfinished, a step towards a material and imaginative re-scripting of environmental futurism. What else, they ask, can we do with a planet of fire? How do we ride the Tyger? Partly for me, it is reconnecting with that elemental wonder, Pandora's fireworks, a pyrotechnics of desire. I have to admit that for me, this episode is in a way also an excess. A natural exuberance, a spilling over of the hours of reading, researching, listening, learning, and writing. And I would like to end this episode with my thanks to another teacher who also transformed so much of my learning in the previous podcast season on water. Alexis Pauline Gums, a poet, writer, and feminist extraordinaire for me, has also written on fire. And for me, it makes sense to end with some of the most beautiful and troubling questions she asks. She asks us to remember the character of fire, heeding the advice of M. Jackie Alexander in Pedagogies of Crossing. Fire is not only hot, it is strong, and the nature of fire is to transform everything. Ignis mutat res. Fire changes things. So in this way, we can rewrite the story of fire as pure loss, entropy, and heat death, the point at which the last star would cool to ash. Rewrite the story of loss. In a powerful piece in Harper's Bazaar this year, titled Heat is Not a Metaphor, Alexis Gums writes, with extreme heat weather events and crossing thresholds of survivable temperatures, menopause is a powerful lens through which to look at this hot planetary crisis. She notes that we are living on a menopausal planet. This is not a natural part of Earth's life cycle. This is brought about by us humans as geological agents armed with fire. She compares our planetary hot flashes with symptoms experienced in menopause that are often caused by toxic environments and substances. Gums writes that while change is inevitable for this planet and all life, the heat we are now experiencing is not. It is the result of toxic systems that are putting stress on every one of Earth's ecosystems at the same time. Menopause is also a liminal space of possibility, something which resonated so powerfully for me in my own personal menopausal journey, which has also given me a time to pause and reflect. Gums asks in this extraordinary piece, what if we live on a menopausal planet where underneath this heat, we are supposed to be learning something about change? What if menopause is the greatest undersung gift? The experience that grants us a multi-generational, multi-species consciousness we need. And as she writes elsewhere, what if we let ourselves blacken and change? For this episode, I would like to thank Tushar Das, who helped put together the sound design and produced this episode, and our long-standing partners Waka Media for the rest. The Subverse is the podcast of Dark and Light, a digital space that chronicles the times we live in and reimagines futures with a focus on science, nature, social justice, and culture. You can also follow us on Instagram at Dark and Light Zine. If you like the show, please tell a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. So long, and thanks for listening.